Let's talk about it. 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 On the field.
Hello, hello, hello. I'm so glad to see you here today. I am excited about my guest, Dr. Blanton. Having a problem speaking already. Dr. Edwin Blanton, and I'm going to pull him up. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing great, Vera. It's wonderful to see you.
It's wonderful to have you here. And what I'm going to do, let me just share this brief bio, and then I'm going to ask you to expound and tell us a lot more about Dr. Edwin Blanton. He is the co-founder of Ready, Willing, and Able, an international nonprofit focused on educational programs for children with disabilities in developing countries. This followed his service with U.S. Peace Corps in the West Indian country of Dominica. The children that RWE supports became his inspiration for his children's book, Together We Can. Dr. Blanton is a certified volunteer administrator, a Gallup certified Clifton Strengths coach, and holds a PhD in international education and entrepreneurship. In addition to his nonprofit work, he also serves as Assistant Vice Provost for Corporate Initiatives and Business Development at the University of Texas in San Antonio. Well, I am so honored to have you here with me today. And what I'm going to do is give you the floor and have you share more about you and what was it that gave you this passion and this drive to work with children with disabilities. So the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Vera. And thank you very much. Really, it starts very young. When I think about when I grew up in southern Missouri on a farm. And so it was very...
Excuse me, we're having technical difficulties here. Okay, for some reason, I was not able to bring you up solo. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Okay. All right. So I grew up in southern Missouri on a farm, and so in a town outside of town where the shoe factory closed down, the mines had closed down, and it was just kind of a sleepy town, but it was a wonderful area to grow up. And my parents were so engaged in their community, not only in involvement with the church, but with different civic groups. And that really inspired in me a lot of volunteerism and a lot of thought about not only do I want to make a living, but make a life. And so I want to volunteer as well as have a career. And when I went off and I went to university, and after that, I decided, I want to join the Peace Corps. And I'd first heard about the Peace Corps, and hopefully a lot of your viewers have heard of it as well. It's now 61, it turned 61 years old this year, but it was founded by JFK back in the 60s. And it was really had the three-part mission of volunteers going to a country and providing assistance to the country, sharing the culture of the United States and also experiencing the culture of the host country. And the third goal, to come back to the United States and share with those living here in the U.S. what life was like in wherever country you went to. And currently, the Peace Corps, due to COVID, it stopped operations. And so volunteers actually came back. Many of them helped here locally, stateside, with COVID relief. And within the next year, they're going to be going back out to 30-some countries. And so that's what I did, was I joined the Peace Corps, and I went to the West Indian country of Dominica. And hopefully some of your viewers know it. It's often confused with the Dominican Republic, but a very different country. It's much smaller. It's 17 miles by 23 miles southeast of the Dominican Republic in Puerto Rico. If you look on a map, it appears very small on a global map, but it is an independent country, a former British colony. And so in Dominica, serving as a Peace Corps volunteer, I worked directly with the village council, but also one of my side projects was to coach Special Olympics. And so Special Olympics is a worldwide organization. I imagine many viewers are familiar with it. And on Saturdays, we would, in the capital city, have Special Olympics practice. And so it would be tennis. We didn't have a tennis court, but we had tennis rackets and tennis balls, and we could still practice that. And we would do relay races, bocce ball, other things like that. And one of the things that I noticed, as well as another fantastic Peace Corps volunteer, Jennifer Catron, who's a trained school psychologist, noticed as well, was that while kids would come to the Special Olympics on a Saturday, they didn't go to school throughout the rest of the week. And they didn't go to school throughout the rest of the week for a variety of reasons. One was, in some cases, the school had a fee. And so if parents who were struggling, and especially in Dominica at the time, unemployment was roughly 25%. And so if parents had to choose which of their children goes to school, typically the child with a disability is the one that would have to stay home. There was also a stigma around children with disabilities. And so sometimes those children were intentionally hidden away from that. But then also at the school itself, you'd have both physical problems as far as perhaps stairs to get into the building that really could cause some barriers for children with physical disabilities, overcrowded classrooms, and then also just teachers that haven't received training on special education, which really affects both your intellectual and your physical disability there. And so with all of these, we realized, okay, there is a lack of access to education for children with disabilities. And when we returned from the Peace Corps, so we returned to the U.S., typically a Peace Corps assignment is 2 years. And we returned and we thought, let's do something about this. And in many ways, it was very naive because we were like, yeah, we can change the world. You know, Margaret Mead said, you can't change the world. I'm completely butchering her quote, but she said all it takes is a small group of people. And so we thought, okay, well, let's do that. And we looked for an organization that we could really partner with that would help, help the population with access to education. And we didn't find anything that really fit. And we had some great organizations in Dominica, the Special Olympics, as well as 3 other organizations that were already willing to work with a U.S. entity. So we said, we'll just create our own nonprofit. And so that's what we did. And so it's turning 16 this year. And one of the things that we did was working with those 4 organizations, trying to identify, okay, what could be done? And one of the things to be done was, well, how about a summer camp for children with disabilities? And not just a summer camp. There's a lot of value in just having a lot of fun and having an area for children with disabilities to come together in a judgment-free area and get to know one another and socialize. But it's also an opportunity to really work on everything from your life skills. So you're cooking. So we did cooking, sewing, woodworking, some computer skills. But also that's an opportunity to read a story, do a math lesson. Cooking and fractions go so well together. There's so many other fun ways to bring in math or reading into it, as well as many other uh, wonderful lessons, money management, hygiene, so many other things that we could make happen. And so this camp started in 2007, uh, and we did have six campers that first year. So it started very small, right? Like a lot of dreams do. It starts
Mm-hmm.
small, and then we grew. Like the next year, it was over twice the size, and we had twice the number of volunteers and more than twice the number of children with disabilities at the camp, and it continued to grow. And as it grew, we realized, hey, some of these kids are becoming teenagers, they're becoming young adults. Let's see what we can do about leadership skills as well. And and so some of those first campers became leaders. And so one of the students, his name is Loic. He was there with us in 2007, and Loic was born prematurely, and his family was fortunate enough to have him treated at the hospital there in the country. However, and one of the common things for uh, babies that are born prematurely is to be placed on oxygen. However, Hurricane Marilyn hit the country, and so being an island, obviously that can happen, and there's not a lot that can be done about it. The electricity went out, and when that went out, then the regulator for his oxygen also malfunctioned, and he received too much
Mm.
oxygen. And so Loic then went blind because of receiving too much oxygen. And so he was one of our first campers in 2007. And with Ready, Willing, and Able, not only do we want to educate the person with the disability and remove barriers for them to gain access to education, but we also want to make sure that we can educate the family about education, about the disability, so they understand what their child, what their sibling is going through. And the third one is educating the public that disability is not inability. And I remember that first summer camp, uh, folks that just happened to come by the camp would say, well, he's not going to be able to hammer on the woodworking, or he's not going to be able to sew that t-shirt that all the other kids were sewing. But through a lot of patience and a lot of modification
Yes.
and some really dedicated volunteers, some really keen teaching methods, he was able to accomplish all of those.
See, and it's so sad when people put limits on what people are capable of doing. And so for you to have a camp where you're saying no limitations, you may be limited physically in one way, but that does
Mhm.
not mean that you are totally without capabilities. That's awesome.
Yes, exactly. And so we come up with that modification to figure that. And so that's, for instance, in Loic's case, that was his first summer. But then fast forward 2 or 3 summers when he was a teenager, him and some others bringing into leadership skills and being able to run a portion of the camp. And then a few years later, even more and even more. And so the camp became more and more self-sustaining, which is always one of the goals in an international project, right? And so how can it be more and more self-sufficient in getting in the volunteers, the instructors, and all of that? And for that young man, that was really, just a key part, from between his second summer at the camp to the third summer. He went to secondary school. And so we can think of that as high school here in the United States, but not everyone gets in, and you actually have to pass an exam in order to go past really the what we would think of as the eighth grade here in the United
Hmm.
States. And so he was the first student who was blind and took the test in Braille, and he passed in the top 25 percentile,
Wow.
and went on. And thankfully also him and many others like that also have disabilities have been with that camp every year and everything. Loic, and your viewers will see there on the screen that
Yes.
GoFundMe. So Loic, working with Ready, Willing, and Able, and we worked with my alma mater here in San Antonio, University of the Incarnate Word. And so he was able to come here and study sociology, minor in marketing. And in fact, 10 days ago, he graduated. Um,
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
so it was a super, super big moment. His grades were just posted yesterday, a 3.6
Oh
GPA,
my God. And he's blind.
and he is blind. And so
Oh,
if you think about everything as, how to get to class, how to get to the cafeteria, how to do your homework, how to make friends,
yes.
all of that. And so he's been able to really navigate that really, really well. And so so that's why there is the GoFundMe to kind of wrap up some of those last expenses he had. But now, what a story. And that's only one
Yes.
example. And so I have dozens and dozens of other children, very, very similar. Not all of them are to university yet, or perhaps will go to university, but they've all been able to get more access to education than what they previously had. And it started really with a thought and people working together
That
to
is
make it happen.
wonderful. That is wonderful. So your summer camp runs the entire summer?
So typically it'll be a week-long camp.
Okay.
And so, however, activities can go on for even longer. And so, quite often at camp, that then inspires like other take-home projects to do throughout the rest of the time. And in addition to summer camp, over the last 16 years, we've been able to work with all of our partners there and kind of expand what there is offering during the school year.
Okay.
So there are many more opportunities during the school year than there were back when I was in the Peace Corps, thankfully.
That is wonderful. Now, are you doing these camps? And thank you for correcting me with the name of the island because I didn't know either.
Right.
So I appreciate you correcting me with
Yeah,
that.
you're welcome. It's known as the Nature Isle of the Caribbean. It's absolutely beautiful. Hopefully you'll get a chance to visit someday.
Yeah, that would be great. Now, are you doing these camps in other countries right now?
So over the course of the 16 years, so we were invited to take part in a program in Paraguay. And so we were able to do that for a short while, as well as the school for children who are hearing impaired in Mexico. And so being here in Texas, this was actually a school on the border, on the Mexican side of the border, right? And so it's close to us, relatively speaking. And so we were able to do that. And we've gotten invitations everywhere from the South Pacific to Africa. Most of those based on our capacity right now. We're happy to share curriculum, ideas, set up calls such as this, and kind of talk through the process. But being a small nonprofit that's also a volunteer project of everyone that's involved, it doesn't have that capacity to take on all of that just yet.
But it will. It will.
And right. I mean, I really think a lot of things either it will or it's going to inspire someone, and perhaps even one of your viewers, to go out, and just be like, okay, well, if he did it, I can do it too.
Yes,
And to either do that or do other good in the world.
absolutely, which will bring me to another point. But first, I want to ask, are you doing anything at all in the United States?
Mm-hmm. So with Ready, Willing, and Able, our project mostly involved going to schools and libraries and sometimes public events, and really just helping to raise awareness about persons with disabilities worldwide.
Yes,
Because there's so much awareness that needs to be brought just here in the United States, but then everywhere needs so much awareness. And a lot of special ed classes special education classes really work with children with disabilities on how to interact with other children, but there's not a lot of instruction for other children on how to work with, how to interact with a child with a
Yes.
disability. So it's a two-way street,
Yes.
right? And I've noticed this even with adults. If I can tell a quick story, just recently
Yes.
with Loic, here he is in his senior year of the university, and we went to a restaurant, and we went to I don't want to name the restaurant, it's a national chain, but it's a national chain where you go and you look at the counter and you say, yes, I want this vegetable and this vegetable and this vegetable, and they make whatever and you get it. And so one thing was, we park, we get out. It's very common. He puts his hand on my shoulder, his other hand has the cane. I guide him in, and of course, as we get close to the door, someone darts in front of us, and instead of holding up open the door for us, goes in. All right. Then we get to the counter where they want to ask, like, okay, what vegetable and this and that. And as it had been, I'd already had dinner, and he was the one that was ordering. But the attendant was always looking to me to answer the question. And at the end, it's like just making sure they knew, oh, he's the one eating, as you have to wait for his answer. And sometimes it might take a moment because he'll need someone to describe what that looks like, right? Or what are all the options available, and so thinking about that. And so even adults need some coaching and really some awareness on interacting with persons with disabilities.
And before we got on, we were talking about being an ally. And right now, with not only the discrimination towards people with disabilities, but the tensions that are in this country right now, and not just where Blacks are concerned, but people of color, period, as well as disabilities and Jewish people, just all of this hatred that's going on towards everybody, disabilities, race, the whole gamut. We had talked about allies. So my question to you is, can you share with our audience some things that you would encourage all of us to do? I know we can't change the world, globally like that, but each of us can do our part. Each of us, I think about the Uber driver that made the racist couple leave out of his car when they said, oh, we're glad you're white, and to have that kind of ally is needed no matter where we are, and calling things out, just like with Loic, is that how you pronounce his name?
Yes.
Just like with Loic, and you were able to say to the worker, he can make his own, he can tell you what he wants. Yes. And so we need to be able to do that and speak out when things are not the way they need to be. So I'd like for you to kind of speak on that a little bit. And then I want us to talk about these pillars that are in the other book that you have. And I want to talk about the children's book that you have as well.
Sure, certainly. And so I think one of the key things about an ally is the importance of active listening, right? And so and what we'll get into next with the pillars and the 5M model is so important. But it takes so much active listening for us to all come to the table.
Yes.
And try to have that understanding. And that really takes a lot of effort on all sides for us all to be at the table and have those conversations. And so allyship is super important, not not just in case of race and disability, but in so many other areas. I think about my background. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a very rural area, right? And so I think about, well, there's a lot of limitations to access to education in our rural communities,
Yes.
right? And so, okay, well, how can I be an ally for that? And what does that mean? And how do I turn from being a very passive ally to a very active ally, and realizing my role as an active citizen to make sure, even though I am in a, I live very urban right now, in the great city of San Antonio, but also how can I be an ally and an active citizen and making sure that I speak up for persons in those rural communities that don't have access to the same education or the same utilities? Or how about in, in my own city, there's a health disparity. The south side of the city, there are fewer clinics, there's fewer fresh vegetables, there's fewer grocery stores with fresh produce. So not only listening uh, and being aware, but also turning that ally into active citizenship and being able to speak up and say, this is not right. We need to do something to address this.
Yes. And we need to have the courage to
Yes.
do that. And it takes courage to do
Yes.
that,
Yes.
especially in this day and age, because you never know how people are going to respond.
Right. Right. It takes courage, and then it also takes follow through.
Yes.
Right. And so, and sometimes, folks may have the courage, but not the follow through. And so it really, it takes a lot for us all to really, come together and say, together we can.
Which is the name of your book.
It is.
Yes. Let's talk about the book.
So back in 2011 was when, and it actually came about as an assignment. So I was just beginning to work on my PhD at that point. My PhD is in international education, but an assignment was to look at a children's book and develop something for the classroom. And so I thought, being an ally for children with disabilities, I thought this is an opportunity, because looking at books for children with disabilities, I could only find one at that time, but only one children's book that had a child with a disability as the main character. And so, knowing there was a lack there of that, and also, an opportunity, so many of our thoughts as humans start very early on.
Yes.
So how could it be a children's book? And so it's written at the third grade level, so a third grader could read the book. But of course, all ages, this book can be read to them, and really thinking about that. And so it was a class project, but not only a class project. I decided, instead of doing it just for class, how could I also use this, one, to continue to be an ally, but also to bring awareness to Ready, Willing, and Able and the work that we do with it. And so this wonderful story about a boy who's a wheelchair, and he really wants to go to school. And it really talks about some of his strengths. And it starts off talking about how he's the best checkers player in his village, and how many of the other things that are very similar to a lot of kids are similar to him. He likes to laugh and play games and have his mom read him a story and all of that. But he goes to school, and at the school, the principal's like, no, you can't come in. Like, you're in a wheelchair and we have stairs. And the children say, well, yes, you can, Winsley. And Winsley's the name of our main main character there. And we'll help you. And so they help Winsley up the stairs, and the teacher says, oh, like, I'm too busy to work with you. And the other kids say, well, yes, we can. And so they help
beautiful.
him. And so the book goes on until, like, other folks in the area notice, and they build a ramp for him. And then the village leader comes in and says, like, we need to make education available for all. and so the theme, together we can, comes up throughout it, as well as you can see that Winsley has some great talents, and the willingness of other individuals to say, together we can make a difference and
And
do something about this. And so that's how really the story developed. And after I had the class, I had it reviewed, and actually, thankfully, I have access to a lot of wonderful experts in both children's literature and special education, and to be able to work on that, as well as the illustrator was also and is also a special education teacher who had been to Dominica with our summer camp and very involved in that as well. And so had an idea of, okay, it was an all volunteer effort for a book that all proceeds then benefit Ready, Willing, and Able. So then they go to a summer camp.
that's awesome. So where can people purchase the book?
And so it can be found on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, as well as other online book retailers.
Yes. And when I first saw, and we've talked about this, when I first saw the cover of the book, it caused me to pause a little bit because of the illustration. But understanding our perceptions can sometimes get in the way of the story, and the fact that this book focuses in on the children being the ally for
Yes.
him
Yes.
is amazing, because that will help children understand that that is what they are to do. It reminds
Mhm.
me of a situation where I was in a classroom and this little boy said something like, I can't stand to look at myself in the mirror. And it was heart wrenching. But the beautiful thing was how these children rallied around him and showed him so much love. And
Mhm.
so that is the same with the story about Winslow. Is it
Mhm.
Winslow? Is that
No,
his name?
Winsley.
Winsley.
Uh-huh.
I had the win right. Okay.
But
And
yeah, you're exactly right, and it was an example of youth, um, you know, thinking back to like Whitney Houston, she had it right in her lyrics, teach them well, let them lead the way, right?
yes, yes, and
And
they do. They
yes,
do.
exactly.
Yes. Now let's talk about these pillars, because I know that these things will be something that will help all of us begin to open our minds and our eyes and our ears to the change that is needed, particularly, I know, with leadership. And your book is about
Mhm.
leaders and faculty leadership and things of that nature. You want to
Right.
talk about that?
Certainly. And so this is based on a model that myself and a colleague from another academic institution developed years ago. And we've used it multiple times, both in peace education as well as service learning, study abroad, but also with civic groups. This can be used. This can be used on so many things, and it's fairly simple um, for folks to understand, and how much can be used even today. And so I think, instead of pillars, we can think of it more like a nautilus or concentric circles, where you have something at the core, and then you have layers on top of it. And we do call it the 5M model, because all uh, layers start with an M. And so with and I think also, like, Oliver Wendell Holmes is how we actually start this chapter in the book. So most of your viewers probably recognize the name, but a very famous poet from the 19th century, and he called it the chambered nautilus. And so he had this wonderful poem about a a nautilus that as it develops, the mollusk grows and it changes, and so the shell itself actually changes. And so as it grows and as it becomes more and more, it realizes, hey, I've grown. I can move on to other areas as well. So I think this fits in very nicely into that. So think of concentric circles or that nautilus starting at the center. And what's at the center? And the center is me. So it's really thinking about aspects of self. And so, and thinking about, we all view the world through our own lens. And so, like, my lens is different than your lens, Vera, and it's
Mhm.
different than all of your viewers, because we all have our own individual lens. And there's so much that makes up that lens. E.T. Hall is he developed this iceberg model in 1979, and it looked at um, it was looking at culture and thinking about the iceberg. You
Yes.
see some things of culture like above the water,
Yes.
right? Like let's say food. You can see perhaps dance and entertainment and that sort of thing. But then there's other things under the
Yes.
surface that you might not see, such as um, uh, uh, family structure or treatment of women um, or so many other things that go on in a society. And some other
Yes.
scholars have taken this even further to look at social identity as an iceberg.
Yes.
Right? And
And
so,
diversity is also used in diversity
yes,
as well.
yes. And so, like, walking down the street, and I talk with a number of my college students about this as well. Like walking down the street, um, and you pass someone, what are some things that you might notice? And so some things may be very apparent,
Mhm.
and some things you might have a hint. Like, you might get a hint of their socioeconomic status based on how they're dressed. You Chances are, unless they're let's say a Catholic nun or a Hasidic Jew, you may not get a sense of what their religion is, right? And so some things are definitely above the water, some things are below the water,
Yes.
and it's thinking about all those different dimensions of diversity. And quite often we might focus on, one that we've already mentioned here, race, or gender, or ability. But then there's so many others that make up an individual, and some of those are above the iceberg, some of those are above the water, some of those are below the water. And so where are those? And so that's why in this 5M model, things start with me and just an understanding that self reflection, that everything is coming through my own personal lens. And this is also where core values are as well.
Yes.
Thinking about, okay, what are my personal core values? And then the second one is, go ahead.
And I don't mean to interrupt, but in terms of core value, and I may do this for each one of these pillars, but
Sure, that's fine.
in terms of core values, that is the thing that's lacking right now. So, how would you, and this may be a loaded question, but in terms of what would you say to a parent to help them understand how to tap into core values and how to determine core values within their home, because
Mhm.
those core values are that's the brick, that's one of the bricks, like you said, it's a part of the model. And so what would you say to a parent, um, and it may be with a child with disabilities or it may not be, but what would you say to a parent about core values and the importance of identifying those things, and possibly, well, let me shut up and let you answer it.
Right. Yeah. Actually, I would take some of the hints from Gallup, where I'm a certified strengths coach with them, but I would name it, claim it, and aim it. And so it's very simple, and your viewers can find a lot of online tools for this. If you just go to, a search engine and type in, how do I define my core values? But a common practice is to look at a list of 50 core values and be like, okay, if I could only choose 20 of these, what would the 20 be? And then think about it and be like, okay, what are the 10? If I can only keep 10,
Yeah.
okay, now what are the only 5? Okay, and so to come up with those 5, but then also how you define integrity and how I define integrity may be slightly different. Now, chances are it's very similar, but then for the whole house to understand, like, okay, one of our core values, let's say, is honesty, and here's how we define it. One of our core value, and to really have that discussion with loved ones. I've worked with a lot of individuals, a lot of students on identifying core values. I've worked with corporate teams on identifying values, right? But then also it's something beyond just name it. Corporations struggle with this because they'll like to name
Yeah.
their value. Oh, our values are, customer friendly,
Yeah.
whatever they might list those 5, but then can they really tell me what those mean? So not only name it, they gotta claim it by actually showing it, and then aim it. Like, how am I going to try every day to live these 5 core values? And so it's being able to know those,
Yeah,
right?
that's a training within itself.
Yes.
That's awesome. So you're a strength coach. Wait a
Yes.
minute. I guess we better do one thing at a time.
You'll have to have me come back on another show for that. But
Okay.
but yes, and so there's so much that goes into that, and so that's what I would suggest for both individuals and families wondering what their core values are. There's some great exercises such as that.
Okay. So me first, and then what's the next one? Because
So
I'm putting these in the chat as you share them.
oh, okay, great, thank you. And
Hmm.
so the next is motivation. And so motivation is the next M, and it's like really like, why should I be doing this? And so it's to really have that moment to reflect on whatever it is you're doing. And so I've used this with students, like I said, doing volunteer projects, with doing study abroad, but also it's like, why am I even in school? Why am I working this job? Why am I arguing with my teenager? So like there's so many things that go into this, but it allows for that self-reflection on why am I doing this? And again, it's the other layer just on top of me. And so sometimes it's, oh, I'm doing this because that's the way my parents did it, or I'm doing this, so it really takes a lot of that reflection.
Hmm. Okay.
The next one is mindful. And so think about that. And that's just being aware of your thoughts, and also being aware of your identities and your privileges, right? And so
Say that
we
again.
uh-huh.
Mindful.
Mindful, it's being aware of your thoughts, but also namely of your identities and your privileges.
Now let's talk about privileges for a minute.
Hmm. Sure.
Okay. Because, we have these unearned privileges.
Yes.
And so when you talk about privileges, can you kind of expound upon that a little bit?
Hmm. Right. And so yeah, so we all have um these privileges, and some of the privileges just happen. It's just because of how we were born, where we were born, what kind of family we were born into, what skin color we came out of the womb, being, right?
Okay, go ahead.
And then, so it's being aware of those thoughts and those privileges. And so some privileges are unearned, right? and
Yes,
and some privileges are earned.
yes, yes. Okay. We're going to
So
come back to that at another time.
okay,
Because
all right.
I'd like for you to come back and let's talk about privileges, earned and unearned privileges.
Mhm,
Okay.
sure.
Okay. The next one.
So the next one, is meaningful. And so it's thinking to a particular experience. And so if you use the 5M model, whether it's with thinking about your peace education or your volunteer experience that you perhaps have, what was significant or noteworthy about the experience, and thinking about, okay, what really made this meaningful. And so it has that opportunity to do that. One of the wonderful ways to do this is through storytelling. And so to also think about, how can I tell the how can I tell this and express this. And one of the best ways to do that is through storytelling.
Okay.
And then the fifth one is matter. And so if you think about so many things, they fall into the what, the so what, and the now what. And the so what is and the matter is kind of the so what. Why does this matter? So why does my ability to volunteer in the community, why does that matter? Why does this experience I'm having, why does it matter? And so it's thinking about what is the so what, and it's just, again, it's having that reflective thought to think on that before you do the now what, which is what I mentioned earlier when I was talking about allyship. It's not just having the courage, but it's also having the courage and the follow through.
Okay, so the so what, the now what.
Yes.
Okay.
And so the matter wraps it up. So me, motivation, mindful, meaningful, and matter.
Yes. Okay, awesome. And you share this with corporations, faculty, leadership as well.
Correct. And also we've used it with both university and community college students in a variety of capacities as well.
That's wonderful. That is awesome. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the book. I wanted to talk about both books. And we've got someone that says, hello. Hello, Kimberly. How are you? Glad you're here. Thank you for showing up. Okay, so one of the other things, and maybe we do have a little bit of time for you
Sure.
to kind of touch on this strength coaching, just kind of touch on it a little bit, because we got some time.
Certainly. And I think it's a wonderful tool, and it's something that really, I believe, people should really know about. And so people have heard about Gallup. Probably, you hear all these polls all the time.
Right, Gallup
in the latest
polls.
Gallup poll, we've
Yes.
learned that so many Americans prefer, whatever. But one of the things that Dr. Don Clifton did, and so he was a psychologist, and he thought, what would happen if, instead of focusing on what's wrong with people, let's focus on what's right with people. And so I think about when I was in elementary school, I would come home with my report card. And gosh, I love social studies. I loved reading. I loved English. And so you'd see my report card. It was like, an A or B in English and an A or B in social studies. And you get so far down, then you'd come to math. And math was always like a C, right? And so what was the first thing my dad said? We got to do something about math, right?
Right.
And so, and not that we all don't need a baseline level of knowledge on many, many different things, but instead of, it could have focused on my strengths. Oh, okay, well, he's got a B in reading and a B in English, right? Maybe we can focus more on writing, or creative writing, storytelling, that sort of thing, and really kind of build on some strengths. And so in a lot of ways, that's what Clifton Strengths does. And so it's an online assessment, and there's many books out there. Clifton Strengths, they recently rebranded within the last few years, so some of your viewers may have known them as Strengths Finder or Strengths Quest. But it is an online assessment.
Is it free?
It is not free.
Okay.
But the cost is not extravagant, right?
Okay.
And so I believe a book with the code on how to get the assessment is less than $20 at pretty much any bookstore. But what it does is then it takes 45 minutes to complete this assessment. And then there are 34 different strengths categories. and it will tell you your top 5. Now it tells you your top 5 and it doesn't tell you your bottom 5, because again, it's focusing on your strengths. And so
Thanks.
thinking
Yeah.
about what your strengths are. And I've worked with both university students as well as corporations. Do a lot of work with nonprofit groups on this as well, thinking about, okay, well, what are the strengths of your team? And then you all kind of understand then this language, and okay, this is what makes me tick. Yes, I am really good at that. Like I get so much energy out of this particular thing. It helps you teach that. So for instance, my top 5 are strategic, focus, responsibility, futuristic, and empathy, right? And so what this means is, yes, I'm really good at being a strategic thinker. I really can focus when I need to get something done. I have responsibility, which means if I say I'm going to do it, means I'm going to do it. If I say I'm going to be on the Vera Thomas show, I'm going to be on her show, right? Futuristic. So it's being able to have that dream and turn it into a reality, right? Like having a dream that children with disabilities should have a fun, educational summer camp to go to, and let's make that happen. And then the fifth one that I lead with is empathy. And so, more and more, there's more and more literature on empathetic leaders. I think the
Yes.
pandemic really brought that out, right?
Yes.
You could
Yes.
really see, so many people had to juggle, trying to work in a virtual environment, but then also having kids. So
Yes.
we're also, trying to be a teacher also.
Yes.
And I think it was really obvious who the leaders with empathy were. You
Very
know,
clear.
those are the ones where it created loyalty among their teams. It helped with retention, and really helped us. We're not completely through it, right?
No.
But we're a lot better than we were
Yeah.
2 years ago.
Now, these this strength assessment,
Mhm.
does it sounds like it can also tie in with like Myers-Briggs or even Holland or
Right. And there are some similarities, and there's also some online tools that can be like helps distinguish them and what they have. And I know
okay.
with several of those, I've done those as well, and then kind of looked at it and be like, okay,
And you can see how they tie in together.
yes, exactly.
Yes. And I want to encourage our audience assessments and finding out more about yourself. That is so important. And so there are some assessments online that are free,
Mhm.
but I just want to encourage you to seek out tools that are going to help you better understand who you are so that in so doing you can better understand maybe why you do things the way that you do or why you relate or react to different things the way that you do. Assessments are very important, not only in the workplace, but also in our personal lives. And I wanted to throw that out there because I think it's very important.
Yes, and there are so many different ones as well, as you mentioned, and it kind of goes back. If you think about the Nautilus in that first circle, that me, right? It gives you an
Yes.
opportunity to reflect back on yourself, and so many of those assessments, whether it's a Strengths Finder or even so, I've gone through Myers-Briggs a number of times, and I'm like, that sounds just like me, right? And so it really helps with that self-reflection.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. We're almost out of time. Oh, I've got to push this camp. So let me do that right quick. I'll bring you back up in a minute, okay?
Go right ahead. I love
Okay.
summer camp. Go for it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, audience, I do want you to know that I do have a summer camp that's scheduled for the entire month of June. It's a 5-day camp. The first week is for boys and girls. The second week is for girls only. The third week is for boys only. And the fourth week is for boys and girls. I'm only accepting 10 in the camp because I want to make this very personal and make sure that we are making a difference in these children's lives. And so I do want you to seriously consider signing up, and you can sign up at, as a matter of fact, let me pull this up right quick so you can see it. So the summer camp, the week of June 6th through the 10th will be for boys and girls. June 13th through the 17th, girls only. June 20th through the 24th, boys only. June 27th through July 1st, boys and girls. We're going to be talking about self-esteem and confidence. We're also going to be dealing with bullying issues, being a bully, being a victim, and being a bystander. It's very important that our kids recognize each of those and look at themselves and how they can better improve in any of those areas. We're also going to be teaching presentation skills and intro to presentation skills. What's exciting about this camp is that kids are going to be able to see from day 1 to day 5 their progression. And so I want to encourage you to go to bit.ly/greatness 2022. Yes, let me put that in the comments. And it's bit.ly/greatness 2022. So please sign up. I'm only accepting 10 kids per camp. And so we want to be able to make a difference. So I wanted to share that. And I do hope that you go to that website and register today, because it is on a first come, first served base. Okay, that's done.
All right.
So I am going to give you the last few words. I want you to share whatever it is you want to share with our audience. What is it that you want to leave for each of us to know and to take into consideration?
Well, certainly. And again, thank you so much, Vera, for this opportunity. I want to say, and touch base on one thing that I mentioned earlier for us to all keep in mind. And really, when we think about that 5M model and thinking about me at the core of that, is when we interact with others. And I talked a lot today about interacting with persons with disabilities, but when we interact with others, having the both the spending the effort as well as having the courage to listen and try to further develop understanding. When it comes with persons with disabilities, I hope it's a better interaction than the one I described with Loic going to a local restaurant. And hopefully all of the other interactions that you have can be done where learning is involved and you have the ability to be an ally and an active ally with follow through. And so, Vera, thank you again for this opportunity.
Well, listen, thank you for being here. And I think the work you're doing is phenomenal. And the fact that you're working with children and letting them know just because you have a disability does not mean that you are disabled. You know what I'm saying? Right. That just came out. So anyway, I really appreciate you being here. And I want to thank our audience. Now, this will play on a continuous basis throughout the time. So I'm sure that there will be replays that people will be watching on this. So thank you again. And I want to thank our audience for being here. And I want you to wait before you leave. Okay.
All right.
Okay. So I want to thank you all for being here, and we will see you next week.
The Vera Thomas Show. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Let's Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. On the Vera.
All right.
All right. Good